The amusement park industry is quite interesting to say the least. It's one of those industries that I don't really think is ever stagnant. Certain sections of it may seem to be moving slower at certain times than others, but there's always something interesting going on somewhere in the amusement park world. Which is why I plan on covering amusement parks a lot more on the channel, at least news and things like that, because it's just so interesting and wild, all the different stuff that's going around all the time. And even if you're not necessarily into these kinds of things, I think you'll find it interesting just to see what's going on in different places around the world in terms of the amusement park industry. Today's news in particular comes out of Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Now, Seaworld Entertainment, which is the company that owns Busch Gardens, has been doing a lot with roller coasters lately. It makes sense at their main SeaWorld parks because they've been trying to do this thing where they're moving away from the whole sea life part of SeaWorld and moving more towards rides and other non-sea life attractions because of all the flack they've been getting from animal rights activists and stuff for the way that they treat their animals. So they've been building a lot of coasters. For example, at SeaWorld Orlando within the past few years, we're now getting Icebreaker, we got Mako, and I'm pretty sure Manta is relatively new as well. So they're trying to move away from what traditionally made SeaWorld to continue returning a profit by convincing people you can just come to SeaWorld and ride rides instead of seeing poorly treated, captivated sea creatures. What's really interesting is that this isn't just at their SeaWorld parks. They also own Busch Gardens Williamsburg in Williamsburg, Virginia, and Busch Gardens Tampa in Tampa Bay, Florida. And they've been going crazy with additions at those parks as well. As a matter of fact, every single park owned by SeaWorld, except for Sesame Place. They left out on this one. They did just get Oscar's Wacky Taxi a few years ago, though, so they don't really need a new edition for another, 10 or 20 years, because that ride's just so good. It's just on a whole nother level. They're not going to need anything new for a while. That just blew us away. Anyways, every single SeaWorld park, except for Sesame Place, is getting a new coaster for the 2020 season. Just think about that for a second. Try to tell me one other amusement park chain anywhere in the world, really, that's getting new coasters in 2020. The only one I can think of is maybe the Happy Valley chain in China, but no one really talks about them. For the United States, this is unprecedented, especially at this point in the amusement industry. It's really hard for companies to jump in because rides are getting so expensive now, the way the economy is going and the industry as a whole. Most chains, even the biggest chains like Cedar Fair, are only adding 1, 2, 3 coasters a year, and SeaWorld's coming at us with 8? And they're not done yet. They're just throwing out the coasters to all their parks. It's obvious they're trying to build up their Busch Gardens parks as more coaster capitals instead of whatever they were before. So we are going to be seeing just a lot more coasters at the SeaWorld parks, which is awesome because apparently they are doing relatively well. I mean, they're doing better than Six Flags, but then again, literally everyone's doing better than Six Flags at this point. Hate to say it to all of you general public folks, because almost the entirety of the general public seems to have this weird obsession with Six Flags for some reason, but I think within the next 10 or 20 years, they ain't going to be here anymore. Yeah, Six Flags is in a really bad spot right now. They're kind of literally dying. They're clinging on. Then again, Six Flags did already go bankrupt once already, so might happen again and they'll just show back up. Anyways, I'm getting off track. This news comes from Busch Gardens Williamsburg, who is getting a new coaster next year, or this year. It's 2020 already. They're getting a new coaster this year, but I already established that because every SeaWorld park is getting a new coaster this year. But maybe they're getting a new one next year, too? We have some plans for a new roller coaster that have leaked out for Busch Gardens Williamsburg in what we're assuming to be 2021. Now, leaks happen in the coaster enthusiast community not really all the time. And usually when they happen, they're pretty reliable. The only fake leak I can think of in history was when Holiday World was teasing a new attraction for 2020. There was a really weird leaked rendering of an Intamin family launch coaster that was going to use, I can't even remember the name of the ride. Yeah, Pilgrim's Plunge's old station in Key Lounge, and it was going to be a Vekoma. No, I can't, my mind's not working right now. An Intamin family launch coaster that was going to use Pilgrim's Plunge's old station in Kew. Obviously that didn't happen, but that leak looked very fake to begin with. As soon as it surfaced, I was like, there's no way. This seems pretty credible. This is probably a blueprint leak directly from Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This is probably happening. So for those of you that are not coaster enthusiasts, because there's probably a lot of you here, a Giga coaster is a coaster with a drop of over 300 feet. At least that's how I'm going to define it. There's been a lot of debate lately, or really always, about every term that exists in the enthusiast community. I mean, people have always said a Giga coaster is a coaster with a drop between 300 and 399 feet, but then Red Force opens up in Ferrari Land? Yeah, I think that's what it was. In Spain, and that ride has like a 300 whatever, I don't exactly know, foot drop, and people go, oh, it's not a Giga coaster because it has a launch. But that was never in the spec to begin with, so I don't even know. Doesn't really matter though, does it? Point is, this coaster is going to be like 300 something feet, who knows? Okay, it appears the only statistic we have at this point is 355 feet. That comes from an ordinance from the city. I'm probably using all the wrong terms. I don't know much about government. Basically, Busch Gardens Williamsburg has a legal allowance to build up to 355 feet on this project, so it could be shorter than that, but I'm thinking they just go the full 355 feet. So let's just say this is 355 feet. It's still wild. I was just watching Coaster Studios' video on this. It's going to be interesting. So it is going to be a shuttle coaster, which means that the train goes back and forth along the entire track, so you at least do the whole track forward once and the whole track backwards once. So it's not going to be a complete circuit Giga coaster and not a Giga coaster with a lift hill. You are going to launch up to that probably above 300 foot mark. Unfortunately, all of the files I could find for these blueprints online were super low quality and hard to read, but fortunately I did find that bgwfans.com did a really good breakdown of these leaks, and I'll link that in the description below so you guys can go read it if you haven't already seen it. But basically, here is what their breakdown of what everything is going to look like is. So we're starting by rolling out of the station, and there are switch tracks so that they can run 2 trains at once, which is really important for capacity, especially if Seaworld wants to keep building up their Busch Gardens parks as top destination parks for thrill rides. They are going to need the capacity later. That's why I didn't ever think it made very much sense that they put in the Premier Ride Skyrocket 2s at both of their parks. But anyways, this will run 2 trains. That's good. Also important, because if this turns out the way that I think it does, it's going to be one of those wild, crazy rides that enthusiasts from across the country are going to come to Busch Gardens Williamsburg just to see how it goes, and the general public's going to see it and be like, what the actual heck, now I have to ride that to tell my friends that I rode it. Anyways, you'll roll out of the station, across the switch tracks, and onto the first launch. I'm going to go with what Taylor from Coaster Studios said on this one, and that it's probably going to launch backwards into that backward spike first. It has a much smaller support structure, so we know it's going to be the smaller spike. This is not going to be your 300-foot spike, but it is going to be a backward spike. Any kind of backward spike is cool, I guess. I've never actually ridden a ride with a backward spike. Anyways, then you're going to launch forward into a banked turn, followed by an overbanked turn, into another launch, up to your 355-foot tall spike. We're just going to call it a Giga spike. I'm going to call this a Giga coaster. It has over a 300-foot drop. I'm calling it a Giga coaster. That's a Giga spike. So you go out of this Giga spike back down backwards, and I assume the brakes are going to kick in. See, the thing with this type of ride is until we have an actual announcement from the park, we're not going to know exactly how it works. We don't know how many passes it's going to make through between different launches. It could be possible that it doesn't go all the way through that overbanked U-turn the first time. It could launch forward into that U-turn, make it about halfway up, and go backwards into a backwards launch. There are really a lot of different possibilities for exactly how this is going to work out, and we won't really know till the park announces the ride. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting for a park like Busch Gardens Williamsburg, because the Busch Gardens parks have always been about theming, and I just don't see how you theme a 355-foot tall spike. Again, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. In fact, it probably is going to happen, but it still just seems weird to me that there's going to be a giant 300-foot spike in the middle of the park now. I really don't know how this is going to integrate with anything. Also, I know I'm just kind of reiterating points other people have made in videos already, but Busch Gardens already has like 3 launch coasters. This will be their 4th launch coaster. Like, why? Of course, we know this is going to be built by Intamin. Actually, we don't exactly know that, but I mean, what other manufacturer is going to build a ride like this? For those of you who don't know, Intamin is the company that is not afraid to push the boundaries, and they have done some pretty weird stuff in the past. And so they're probably the ones that are going to be doing this. It's just that they already have an Intamin launch coaster coming this year in Pantheon, and then they're getting another Intamin launch coaster, but obviously this is much different. This is not a full circuit launch coaster. It's a shuttle coaster with a 355-foot tall spike. I still can't wrap my head around that. It just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the rest of the layout, I mean, it just doesn't look super exciting. It even seems a little bit uninspired. You have a backward spike, you have a giant spike, and you have 2 bank turns. They might be good bank turns, I don't know. It's just, they could have thrown an inversion in there or something, but I guess if you're hitting 80 miles an hour or whatever on the launch, then you don't want to go into an inversion. That'd be too much force. But yeah, again, it'll just be really interesting to me to see how this exactly integrates into the park. More than anything, that's what I want to figure out. Overall, the timing is just weird. Like I mentioned already, this will be their 4th launch coaster, and they're getting a launch coaster by probably the same manufacturer this year. And then they're just going to get another one that does a lot of the same things Pantheon does. Pantheon has a switch track and a forward and backwards launching section with a backward spike. So that'll already be in existence, like literally across the river from where this is. But yeah, I really think the attraction will be that 355-foot tall spike. And if you know the general public, you know that they won't care that Pantheon is right across the river and includes a lot of the same elements and kind of looks and feels exactly the same. They'll just look and go, that's a big spike. I need to ride that ride so I can fly up that spike and tell all my friends I did that. So yeah, I think this is going to be a big success for Busch Gardens Williamsburg just because anytime you're building something this big, it's going to get a positive response from at least the general public, even if enthusiasts aren't super impressed with the layout. So yeah, I just don't think there's that much for me to really say about it at this point, because there's a lot that's still uncertain, even though we do have the full blueprints. I think it'll be really interesting going into the fall to see when this is actually announced, like what's going on with how exactly it's going to work and how it's going to be integrated into the park. But if you have any thoughts about this ride, go ahead and put them down in the comments below. I like to read and respond to all of your comments. And I'd just be really interested to know what you guys are making out of this, because I know I haven't said anything all too informative in this video, because honestly I'm just looking at this trying to figure out how it makes any sense, which I think is what literally everybody else is doing right now. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the amusement industry is very interesting, and there's always wild stuff going on, and this is just one of those examples. There's always stuff coming out, you're like, wait, what? And in this moment in particular, this current section, this current era of the amusement park industry, the last few years and going into the next few years, I think we're really at a major transition point. They're really starting to push the boundaries of roller coasters in particular, but also other sorts of rides. Theme parks are evolving. That sounds kind of weird, but I think that's what's happening right now, and weird stuff like this is just proving it, that what we thought of a coaster 10 or 20 years ago, just a basic chain lift, do some stuff, go back in the station, that does not exist anymore. If a new coaster's going in, it's going to be something like this. Anyways, I'll see you guys later.